Welcome to the Circle of Birth podcasts. I'm your host and advocate, Ali Kranz. These podcasts are here to gather stories, people and information to better our understanding of the wisdom of birth and how we can reclaim our connections to birth from conception and beyond. You will hear stories not only from Australia but from all over the world, bringing together women, partners, midwives, doulas and all the people that have a birth story to share. So jump right in for this next Circle of Birth story. I had the pleasure today of heading out to Catherine's property for this interview. This woman radiates just pure heart, and we did this show today in a much different format. So Julia, my daughter, and I got to hang out with her tribe while Catherine walked and talked her birth story with Eleanor, who is now 9 years old. So when I got home, I listened to this story and I was just fueled with love and possibilities, and I'm sure you'll feel the same listening to this too. So we'll break these podcasts up into 2 or 3 episodes, as Catherine has 4 children and some more birth stories to share with us. And I'm really itching to hear the next stories too. So welcome and love to Catherine Bell.
Hello, I'm Catherine. I'm a birth cartographer, which means that I like making birth maps, which takes birth plans to a whole new level. I am a mother of 4 children, and today I'm going to share with you the story of my first birth. It was 9 years ago. It was the summer. It was hot. It was the kind of summer that you just wanted to float in a pool. It was pretty good. And we spent most of the time just cruising and floating and just enjoying the bliss of pregnancy. As birth approached, I spent some time talking to my midwife about what to expect, what kind of things would happen during the birth. And it was at that point that it became apparent to me that I needed to get some maternity pads. I was that clueless that I didn't even realise that I was going to bleed after birth. So that was news that I found out in the nick of time. And, it would have been 39 weeks pregnant. And I was talking to my sister-in-law and my sister about their birth experiences. And my sister-in-law said to me, "Oh yeah, the ring of fire. That's a bit of a doozy, but you know what? You just work with it. It's just your body saying slow down, and just breathe it out, and you'll be good." And it didn't make any sense at the time, but I guess I registered it at some level. And being on 40 weeks, I went into labour. It was a beautiful morning. I felt just a bit like the onset of a period. I felt a bit heavier. Something was a bit different. So I said to my husband, I don't think you should go to work today. Might be best if you stayed home. And he sort of went, first births take a while, so maybe I'll just go in and tie off a few loose ends. Call me if anything changes. And I went, okay, no worries. I wasn't in labour. It was just a feeling, just a sense. By about 11 o'clock, I'd had a show and some sensations that I thought fit the description the midwife had given me. So I rang the midwife and she said, yeah, I reckon we'll be seeing you a bit later on today. Sounds like it's all happening. So I rang Andrew and said, "You better come home. It's all on." So he did. By the time he got home, I was swivelling around on my ball, absolutely enjoying the sensations, grinning my face off because I was about to meet my baby. I was so excited. And he got himself some lunch, offered me some food, but I was not interested in eating at that point. I was just doing my thing. And while he ate, he was timing the contractions because we'd been told that we should go to the hospital when the contractions were lasting a minute and were 5 minutes apart. We were about 25 minutes from the hospital. And he'd only been home for an hour, he'd had his lunch and he was timing the contractions, and he said, "You know what? We're at 5 minutes. In fact, it's more like 4 minutes. We really need to change location." So we bundled ourselves up into the car. It was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and we got to the hospital. And as we arrived, the midwife said, "If you just want to wait a few minutes, the good delivery suite with the bath is just about to become available. The previous occupant has just given birth. So if you would like to just hold on, you can have that room." And we're like, okay, no worries. So we went into this tiny little room for a bit of privacy while we waited, and they cleaned up the good room. And I don't know how long it was, but it can't have been very long. But I was picking up. Labour was definitely progressing, and I was getting agitated. Couldn't stay still. You know, I'm going to go and do this. No, I want to go to the toilet. No, I want to do this. Back and forth, getting quite agitated. But then we were given the all clear. You know, the room is yours, make it your own. So Andrew puts on my music. I'm oblivious to all of it. And I just start pacing the room, go to the toilet, and then, you know, moving around, feeling quite agitated. So the midwife suggested I might like to have a bath. Keeping in mind, I'd been in labour for all of a few hours at this point, so being a first-time mum, they're expecting a long haul. So she ran the bath, and I'm getting really agitated by this point, and I might have spewed up at some point as well, or, you know, you're not throwing up anything of worth, it's just a retching, really. Agitated, pace. Bath is filled, in I get, and I just, this is so good, just totally relaxed. And 5 minutes later, my husband's calling the midwife back saying she wants to push. And so there I was, all of 5 minutes in the bath, been at the hospital for maybe an hour, and I'm ready to push. And it was completely involuntary. My body was doing everything. It was amazing. And between each contraction, it was nothing, just total relaxation. There was, you know, no pain, no feelings of being in labour at all. It was, then a contraction would come and we'd be on again, and, you know, pushing the baby out. And then I felt the burning, and I'm going, oh my God, it's burning. And then I remembered the ring of fire. Right, don't push. Really tried hard because baby was coming whether I wanted it to or not. So I had to try really hard to hold back on that contraction and allow my body to stretch that last little bit. And then the burning passed, and we moved on, and then I felt her head crowning, and I could feel hair swishing. It was just amazing. And then this awesome release as her head came out, and it was like, my God, I have just had a baby. My baby is here. Oh, wow, this is just incredible. And they brought my baby up to my chest, and I just took one look at that face. Her eyes were wide open, just going, what did I miss? And it's like, oh, hello, baby, I love you so much. And we just had this amazing 5 minutes of falling in love. And the midwife then noticed that the cord was no longer attached to the placenta, but the cord was not clamped. So this caused concern for her, because my daughter was quite pale, so they assumed that she'd lost some blood, even though she was incredibly alert, and we were fine. I was on an oxytocin high, so I was kind of unaware of a lot of what was happening. But then suddenly they're taking my baby away from me and helping me out of the bath and onto the bed to deliver the placenta. There's now a doctor in the room, and a doctor with the baby, and a doctor with me, and another midwife. And it was starting to feel a little bit Central Station. It was getting quite crowded in that room. And I was spread-eagled on the bed, completely starkers. And so I just sort of looked at my husband and said, do you mind covering me up? And he's just gone, oh, shit, yeah, sorry. And covered me up. And then the doctor has said, come on, you've got to get this placenta out. And then I've gone, oh, that's right, I'm supposed to, I'm not done yet. There's this afterbirth that I've got to deal with. But by now my brain is completely with my baby, and I couldn't focus on birthing a placenta. So they gave me an injection of syntocinon, which is supposed to help expel, with another contraction. And it wasn't happening quick enough, so he asked permission, which I gave because by this stage I didn't really care, to manually take out the placenta. And I'm not sure what the urgency was, whether they wanted to see the placenta to find out what had happened, or whether they were concerned about me. I don't know. But they got the placenta out, and a decision was made in this time period to transfer my baby to the hospital nearby with the NICU, which was about a 20-minute drive away. And they are saying my baby's going, there's now ambulance people in the room preparing my baby for transfer. Even though she's looking around, she's quite alert, and if you just stopped and looked at her, she looked fine, but she was small and pale, so they were concerned that she'd had blood loss. And my husband had enough wits about him to say, what about Catherine? And they're like, what about Catherine? He said, well, you can't take her baby to a different hospital. You need to find a room for her. And he had to insist, but they did it, and they found a room for me at the other hospital, and I had to make my own way, which in hindsight is absolutely bizarre, that a first-time mum was ignored to a degree and allowed to leave a hospital so soon after birth. But basically what happened, maybe we were so insistent that they decided not to argue, but once they decided they were taking the baby, I was relieved of the placenta, I was up ready to follow the ambulance, and they insisted I get dressed before I did this, which was probably not unreasonable. And so I put on a makeshift nappy made with maternity pads and my husband's swimsuit because they couldn't find my underwear. And then I put my dressing gown on, and I didn't even stop to tie it up. I just ran from the room to get to the car so we could chase that ambulance to the other hospital, my coat flying behind me like a cape. It was pretty extraordinary to think that I had just given birth half an hour or so beforehand, and here I am running down a hall in just my dressing gown after the baby. And my husband coming behind with our bags and paraphernalia. We got to the car and made our way in, following the ambulance to the other hospital. And we do not have a name for our baby. What are we going to call our baby? And this seemed really important, that we had to give her a name. We had to decide on a name, and we chose Eleanor. And that felt good. It's like, right, we've named her. This is good. And then when we got to the hospital, we had arrived just after the ambulance on the ward in the NICU, and heard the registrar saying, "Why is this baby here?" Oh well, now that she's here, we better monitor her. So, in effect, the hospital was doing a cover their bum procedure, I expect, being cautious. And so they put my baby into the NICU overnight, and we were told to go down to the ward and have something to eat, and they will call me when she needed to breastfeed overnight. So I breastfed her. It was now 7 p.m. at night. She'd been born at 5, so 2 hours after she was born, she was having her first breastfeed. And then I went down to the ward and found a sandwich and settled into my room, which was a shared room. And there was a woman in there that had her new baby. So I spent the night listening to someone else's baby cry, wondering if my own baby was crying, and was called up to the NICU a few hours later to feed her again, with the promise that they would call me again when needed. And I went back down to the ward to sleep. It's now the middle of the night. And the next thing I knew, my breakfast had arrived. And it was 6 hours since I'd last fed her. And I thought, this cannot possibly be right. She has to have needed to feed. What's going on? And I sat there waiting for Andrew to arrive. And as soon as he did, I said, we've got to go up to the NICU. They haven't called me, but I'm not waiting any longer. And in hindsight, I'm looking back going, why did I feel I had to wait for the call? But I'm glad we went back up. And when we got there, we noticed that the sugar drip that they'd given her as a precaution, which had been on a 10, the number had read 10 when we left the previous evening, was now reading 40. And that didn't seem right to us. We asked the midwife or the nurse why the number had changed, and she said, I thought Mum could do with a rest. And it was, we were supposed to come up and feed her, because if she fed well overnight, we could go home today. And she said, she's fine, and she's fast asleep, mainly because the sugar drip is feeding her effectively. At 10 o'clock, the registrar came in and said, who the hell turned this up? And it was pretty clear to us that the midwife had not acted upon instructions, and it was a concern, because what it meant was that they had to spend the whole day slowly dropping down that sugar drip before we would be released. And so it was the end of the day, and we were only released onto the ward. We had to have another night in the hospital before we were let go the next day. Thankfully, that second night in the hospital, I had the room to myself, so Andrew was able to stay overnight while we just came to grips with the fact that we were now parents, and that mixture of excitement and daunting reality of what the hell is happening. Why are we at this hospital? We're supposed to be at the other hospital. In fact, we should be home by now. So it was quite bizarre. And then the next day when we were released, we stopped off at our first hospital to pick up our blue book and talk to the midwife, and it was then that we were informed that what had happened was the result of a velamentous cord, which basically means that the cord was hanging on by a thread. It was really loosely connected to the placenta, which is a pretty rare situation. And whilst her time in NICU had been precautionary rather than necessary, the fear had been that she had lost blood because she was pale. But it turns out she's naturally a pale person because she's got red hair and pale skin. So unfortunately she didn't have quite enough hair to be able to tell that at the time. But yeah, so what was an absolutely beautiful birth experience had a rather difficult beginning because of hospital protocols, and the effect that ended up having in our first 6 weeks was perhaps shattering my confidence a little bit, and making breastfeeding a bit difficult because of that sugar drip intervention. We struggled with breastfeeding for the first 6 weeks. I could have happily have given birth every day for that 6 weeks, because that was so much easier than learning to breastfeed. I had the works, cracked, bleeding nipples. It was painful and it was horrible, but I persevered, and with sheer determination and very good support from my mother and my sister and the Australian Breastfeeding Association, I got there. And one day, would have been about the 6-week mark, in the middle of the night, I realised I was feeding my baby and it didn't hurt, and it was fantastic. And from there, we just rocked it. We just got more and more awesome. My confidence built, and I sought the company of people that I needed to be with, people who were like-minded, who made me feel good about myself, and I found a mother's group that I really connected with, and that was through the Australian Breastfeeding Association. And we haven't looked back. She's now 9 years old, very healthy, awesome young girl, and now there's 3 siblings underneath her, and she's an awesome help. Excuse me. But there was a lot of, in the last 9 years, there's been a lot of, oh gosh, if only I'd known moments. Things like, if only I'd known to have a contingency plan. We would have dealt with that time in NICU much more differently, and would have been a lot less like deers in the headlights. We would have been a little bit more, right, okay, we get what's going on here and what our options are, and we know where we can find further help. So yeah, if only I knew then what I know now, we would have dealt with that very differently. And the same with breastfeeding. I was a little bit arrogant. You know, I assumed I was going to breastfeed no worries at all, because why wouldn't you? And one of the things that I wish I had have known to do was a breastfeeding education class, to just build a bit of confidence and understand how breastfeeding works, so that you can have an advantage there, because so much of our innate understanding, it takes time to switch on. And over the first year of my first year of being a mum, as each of these instinctual things started to switch on, and I became more powerful and realised just how much I did know, and to go with what felt right and natural, it really made it easier the second time round, because I wasn't starting from clueless. So I really like being able to help mums who are just starting out to not start as clueless, because it does make a massive difference having some of the benefit of other people's hindsight at your fingertips, and knowing where to find good support. Because even with a beautiful birth experience, it shouldn't come down to luck, and it shouldn't come down to just scoring the right midwife. That you can do a lot to make it happen purposefully, not by luck. So that's birth number 1, the birth of my daughter and the birth of me as a mother. And it was incredible, absolutely incredible.
Did you connect with this episode? Then head over to our website, circleofbirth.com. There you'll find show notes, pictures, resources, and potentially connect with today's storyteller. Don't forget to sign up to be updated with new empowering episodes and content. Help the show grow by contributing a tip in the jar to make sure we can continue to better the podcast and connect more and more to the wisdom of birth and each other. Hey, and don't forget the iTunes rating. This has been another episode of the Birth Share Project. We breathe, we birth, we empower.